This week on the Retirement Quick Tips podcast, I'm talking about the key provisions of the One Big Beautiful Bill that was recently signed into law and how that might impact you. Today, I'm talking about the new tax deduction for seniors age 65 plus. Now, other than the direct impact on things like tax brackets and standard deductions and some of the big headline provisions of the One Big Beautiful Bill, this is probably going to impact most Americans, most of you listening to this podcast who are getting close to 65, maybe you'll turn 65 in the next few years if you're not already. So let me explain how this tax deduction works. So the first thing to know about this is that it's temporary. It's only for people 65 or older from the years 2025 through 2028. So if you, or if you're married, your spouse is not going to be 65 during that time period, 65 or older, then this isn't going to apply to you and you can just turn me off right now. But if it does, here's a few things that you need to know. First of all, the tax deduction is $6,000 if you're single, $12,000 if you're joint, but only if you file your taxes jointly, but only if both spouses are age 65 and older. Another thing about this deduction that's important to remember is that there is a phase out depending on your income. So once your income is over $75,000 if you're single, then you're going to start to lose some of this deduction. And then it's fully phased out if your income is over $175,000 if you're single. Now for joint filers, the phase outs begin at $150,000 and then fully phased out at $250,000 of income or higher. So if you're 65 or older and you make more than those phase out limits, this isn't going to help you much. But if you make less than that, it's a pretty good deduction because it's in addition to the standard deduction. One of the key things that I want to point out about this 65 plus senior tax deduction is that it has absolutely nothing to do with Social Security. And there's a lot of confusion about this because apparently there was an email sent out by SSA, Social Security Administration, right after the One Big Beautiful Bill became law. And it claimed that the new law would result in 90% of Social Security beneficiaries owing no tax on their benefits. Now, you can see why this would be problematic, but where it actually comes from is there was this analysis from the White House Council of Economic Advisors, and they estimate that under the new law, all the provisions of the One Big Beautiful Bill, including the 65 plus tax deduction, that 88% of Social Security beneficiaries will have total deductions that exceed their taxable Social Security benefits, which is quite a different thing than saying, hey, guess what? Your Social Security is no longer taxed. Yes, it is still subject to income tax. There has been zero changes to that from a tax planning perspective and how much tax you're going to pay. Now, this is important to understand and tell all your friends especially who say, oh, Social Security is not going to be taxed any longer. No, that is not true. It could cause some people to do some things that they shouldn't be doing because they're operating under the assumption that their Social Security benefits are no longer taxable. But just know that all the same rules that are in place right now for how Social Security is taxed have not changed. What has changed is for certain Americans, you have an extra tax deduction if you're 65 or older and your income is below that threshold that I talked about earlier. One of the takeaways here and one of the key planning considerations, I think, is to, first of all, recognize that this is temporary. It's in effect from 2025 to 2028, and only if you are 65 or older in that time window. And then it very well could revert back to what it was before. We just don't know. A lot of these, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, I had him on the podcast, or Sean Mulvaney, late last year, and he says, I think his quote was, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary tax cut. So something to that effect. So take that for what it's worth. But I think the key takeaway here is that if this applies to you, if your income is low enough, and if you're going to be 65 or older in the next 3+ years, then you could take advantage of this. And if you don't already have tax planning software, let this passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill be the thing that gets you to use tax planning software, especially if you're not going to hire or work with a tax advisor. Another takeaway from this is that you want to be very careful about what you read in the news and what you see online before something is law. And in this case, even after something is law, like you would think that the Social Security Administration would not make that mistake, but they did. And so a lot of people are operating under the assumption right now because they heard it once and then that's what goes in their mind. And then they think that that's what applies and they don't realize or look into it any further and realize that it's actually not the case. Social Security is taxed just like it was before. And the One Big Beautiful Bill didn't touch Social Security at all, at least with all of the reams of paper that I read about it. I didn't see anything about it. So be careful about what you read, what you see, especially before something becomes law, and make sure that you are not missing out on these deductions, especially the temporary ones, because you're not using the right software and you're not working with a tax advisor in certain cases. All right, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Ashley Michike, and this is the Retirement Quick Tips Podcast.